Good morning, sir.
Hello,
Good
Rob.
morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How you doing, everybody?
Good, good. And
Good.
yeah, and Rob, you're calling in from Texas, I believe. So you're
That's
late
correct.
late morning for you, not early.
Late morning. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I'm thrilled to be here. Um, yes, I'm a research director at IDC, and
Mhm.
I work in our cloud and edge group, um, being an analyst person and covering all that stuff and writing all kinds of papers and talking intelligently to
Yes, yes.
executives.
So give us like kind of
Absolutely.
so you're on the front lines here, talking
Hmm.
with like real customers about how they're deploying generative AI. And I know we've talked in the past about, generative AI obviously has been in the headlines for
Hmm.
a couple of years now, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Right.
And but what we're talking about here is how do we bring generative AI to a more, I don't know if the word controlled environment is, but a more focused environment to do more focused things on edge
Right.
computing. But what's the
Right.
temperature out there with edge computing and generative AI? Is there we're starting to see some inklings of interest?
Just little inklings, I mean, customers are just getting around to the idea of maybe even like I'll say without going to the edge, obviously
Hmm.
the hyperscalers are sucking most of the auction out of the room when it comes to generative AI, and then you've got the neo clouds, right, who are just GPU clouds, and so that's where most of the action is. I'd say 99% of the
Hmm.
action is happening there. Then there's this small movement around the idea of customers. This you and I've talked about this before. The notion of companies got their own proprietary private data, right, from their employees, their machines, their everything, and they don't necessarily want that data to be up in someone else's large language model for the world to see, right?
Hmm.
And so this notion, and I promise I'll get down to the edge here. We're going to make our way to the edge, but kind of that step one is all right. Maybe if the company has the infrastructure capability, and this obviously narrows the list already. The idea of I'm going to download a pre-trained, maybe open source large language model.
Hmm.
Um, and for maybe the largest companies, they could afford to have their own kind of infrastructure in their own data centers or co-location facilities, pre-trained. And then the idea, and like anything, is then you've got to do fine tuning, some RAG to kind of train that pre-trained model on your domain specific information about your company, your business, everything you do, so it can work intelligently. Because then, whether it's employees talking to it through
Hmm.
chat, or if it's
Hmm.
agents communicating with it to take care of tasks, that's what it needs. And so that you kind of get this idea of over time having this enterprise intelligence, enterprise brain that knows everything about your domain. If we start to go smaller than that, and again, it's still really early days, especially when when we're talking about generative AI because it's so big. Um, that's when you start thinking about like quantization, right? Like it's a lot of us have been doing edge computing for a long time, and we did rules engines, if this then that, all kinds of stuff like that, KPIs, and then we started to do some machine learning at the edge, and with TinyML and other things like that, where it made sense.
Hmm.
Obviously, doing generative AI at the edge, depending on which edge you're talking about, is a huge leap, just because they're so much bigger and they require so much more power than maybe a tiny small machine learning model would. And so, generally speaking, I think of that term quantization. I'm going to reduce the precision of a model from maybe 32 bits down to 8 bits or 4 bits.
Hmm.
This kind of, and removing unnecessary weights from it, kind of the pruning. You're trying to do everything to make it smaller, right? Something big, make it smaller. How do I get this thing? You've heard the term distillation, knowledge distillation, and so you're tackling that problem from all these angles to get it small enough. And luckily, there's companies that have small models.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Well, it's kind of the hot thing these days is small language models. I'm sure we're going to talk about that over
yeah,
the next couple of days. But,
oh
10
yeah,
billion parameters or less seems to be sort of the sweet spot. If you look at the proliferation of language models out there,
yeah,
we're seeing a lot more small language models. One of the reasons is, you know, uh, training a trillion parameter model is kind of expensive and
It's kind
is
of a little
only
bit of money there.
like
Yeah,
Sam Altman and one other person can do it. So
exactly.
people are doing much more focused, and
Right.
more efficient, language models. But so I think what you're saying is there's kind of phases. We start with kind of the big public chat GPT stuff, which we're all
Hmm.
familiar with, and unicorn pictures and fake girlfriends and all kinds of important scenarios like that. And then we move to like, well, actually, I have private data. Like maybe I
Yeah.
have my silicon semiconductor roadmap, or maybe I have some other, data sheets about my products and things. I don't want to put that into the public kind of,
Right.
language model cloud. And so I'm going to run that more on-prem, near-prem,
Yeah.
which we would consider to be edge if it's outside the multi-tenant data center.
Sure.
And then you move into then the next phase is, moving into much more functionally focused deployments of edge models. Actually, just as a quick example, when I was in Taiwan last week, we had Advantech had a pretty cool, it was like a kiosk sign with an avatar person,
Hmm. Oh,
and it
cool.
was running a standalone Advantech box with a language model on it that was trained on Edge AI. So we had fed it a bunch of
Wow.
information about the foundation and about Edge AI. And so you could walk up to it and ask it questions about Edge AI, and it
I
would,
love
in
it.
an animated way, respond to you in real
Yeah.
time. And it was
Wow.
all running. There's no cloud. It was
It's all
all
right
local.
there.
It was all like in the sign. Yeah. So you can imagine
Yeah.
those in like an airport kiosk or at the end cap of Home Depot. Whenever every
Oh,
time I
yeah.
go into Home Depot, I'm like, where is the crazy glue, or whatever.
Right.
I don't want to find one of those people with the orange thing. I can just ask the
Exactly.
kiosk.
Where are those people with the orange suits?
Yeah, they're
And
never
so
around.
it's funny you say. I'm glad you said Advantech because my experience with the edge kind of that's where I came from because I was
Yeah,
doing the whole industrial factory thing, and so
right.
at least for me, the edge meant an industrial gateway kind of thing, like an
Hmm.
Advantech box. Dell made some, HP made some, different companies made those things. And when you have that kind of compute at the edge, that
Right.
x86 or ARM, yeah, you can put something bigger on there, right? You can put
Yeah.
a larger model on that, no doubt
Right.
about it. Um,
Exactly. And something like I saw some stat. It was something about it, roughly like a gigabyte of RAM memory per billion parameters ish.
ish,
So
yeah,
something like that. I mean, we're going to get more efficient than that, but that's not unreasonable to put like 16 gig on a
right,
box or 32 gig on a box like that and put it out there on the
right.
edge. Right.
Because
That's not.
people say, I want to put this thing on my Raspberry Pi. And if you have like a Raspberry Pi 4 or 5 with 8 gig of RAM, then you probably could put a 1 to 3 billion parameter
Right.
model in there, but you still are going to probably quantize it down to 4 bits,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
speed is another thing. And so, especially on a Pi, if you're okay with like 1 to 5 tokens per second,
Yeah.
it's like when a bunch of us downloaded DeepSeek onto our laptops and started
Sure.
running it, or someone said build a gamer PC and then get the whole 700 whatever gig of RAM in memory,
Mhm.
but it was still like 1 token per second kind of thing.
Right.
And so yes, so the industrial stuff you're talking about and using those in a store, like you said with the kiosk, they have a lot more horsepower. Then you get down to that Raspberry Pi size,
Hmm.
um, and then but then if we're talking about the really small, microcontrollers,
Hmm.
that's where it starts to get kind of tricky, right? And
Very true.
the problem is, it's we're talking about kilobytes of memory versus megabytes or gigabytes, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
so
don't think we've broken that barrier yet, but
yeah,
yeah.
and so whether we're talking about it's not that I don't love microcontrollers, but it's just fitting the RAM, the data, the
Hmm.
space. They just don't have. It's not even close, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I think you could do it on a Pi with 8 gig of RAM, but yeah, you're probably better off at those other
Mm.
edge computers. And
Yeah.
then you're
I
right,
think.
and then that bigger edge, which looks like servers, but it's not in a data center.
Right.
Kind of like when I was at Hitachi doing Lumada, we made sure that we could run the whole thing on a factory floor, and so we would
Right.
roll in a rack of servers. And you're right, they're running
Right.
at the edge, they're not in a data center, and they needed that millisecond response time.
Right. That sort of feels like that's the frontier right now that people are really thinking about deploying. And then we get into more of the kind of heavier device edge, like the
Hmm.
kiosky kind of thing. And then we get into, I mean, we'll see at CES how many talking refrigerators we see out there, but
What?
um, someone will try it. But then you get it into more of the appliances and stuff, and
Hmm.
that's out there a little bit. But what we're seeing now, at least people are building muscle around standalone multi-billion parameter models that are doing very useful things, which is a lot of what we're going to be hearing about over the next couple of days. And so that
That's
people think
exciting.
about it in phases of like, okay, super public cloud, my own private language cloud, language model cloud thing, not even a cloud server, and then into the device, and then into
Right.
the yes, micro device. Maybe that's something that's a little farther out, but yeah.
Yeah. Until we just start pumping tons of RAM onto microcontrollers.
Well, yeah, and it is right now very RAM bound.
It is RAM bound. You're right.
More than like tops bound. And of course, we haven't mentioned phones. I mean,
Yeah.
um, pretty cool edge device. Most of us have one in our pocket, unless you
Absolutely.
live under a rock. And you can run language models, multi-billion parameter language models on those.
On a phone. But
You know,
when you think about that scenario, whether it's a phone or it's an IoT, a small device, an edge device, or an endpoint, um, you think of that kind of that hybrid architecture. It is probably the best way it's going to
mm,
work. If that makes sense. And this sounds like old news. Training the model somewhere else, getting a little one down there for inference. But you're right. Most of the world is sitting there with their phones. Talking to Claude or ChatGPT or whoever.
yeah,
And it's a hybrid architecture. And
right.
so, and so you can imagine when you want to deploy stuff. If I want to deploy stuff in manufacturing or in agriculture or whatever,
Hmm.
at least right now, for instance, maybe the best bet for edge AI, generative edge AI, is that kind of hybrid model.
Hmm.
I've got APIs back to my cloud or my
Hmm.
core.
Hmm.
Yes. I always used to get frustrated when people said, you're either at the edge or the cloud. And I was like, well, what if we build some big giant thing that's not in the cloud and it's
Right.
somewhere else?
Yeah.
What do you call that? Is it
It's
core?
yeah. There's lots of
I don't know.
edges out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I think just like we talk about hybrid cloud these days
Mm,
as a very popular thing, I think the hybrid architecture is probably what's going to work best for agentic edge for smaller devices that maybe don't have the horsepower. And so there's
right.
API connections or sync connections to a cloud. I can figure out what I can figure out. I can do inference. I can do object detection. I can do classification right here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but if I need to talk to the cloud to get some more love, then I've got an API to do that. Something like that.
Yeah. And what's also cool about the phone and I would say the PC market as
Hmm.
well. I mean, these are high volume markets. And so they're providing an opportunity to for people to cut their teeth
Hmm.
on, generative edge AI technology at scale,
Right.
which would then make its way into more, commercial deployments. Right. So I think like, for example, Qualcomm just introduced kind of industrial versions of a bunch of it's the Dragon Wing stuff, which is derived from Snapdragon.
Right.
So people that are running on those platforms at scale in phones, those models and code is now it provides them with a scale platform, which has always been a challenge, I think, for
Sure.
a lot of the more commercial deployments is kind of they're small volume but high
Right.
impact. So now that I think the PC and phone platforms are providing market opportunity for folks to get things deployed,
Absolutely. And it
which
gets
is
that familiarity built up with
yeah,
people who are using this stuff. So it doesn't seem like it just came from another planet all of a sudden.
yeah,
Um,
and of course the business aspect, which we haven't talked about much, about running things on
mhm.
your own platform. You eliminate your OpEx costs or radically reduce them. So people
That's
don't
right.
always realize like if every AI workload is running in the cloud, then that's ka-ching, ka-ching, and every time
Absolutely. Paying for those tokens, right?
yikes,
Um,
yikes.
and data egress and all kinds of other
Mhm.
stuff. You're right. And so, absolutely, if you can do it on prem, if you can do it in your data center, do it out the edge with your own gear,
Mm,
that's the way to go. And so, go see your friends at Hugging Face or wherever.
there
There's
you
so
go.
many models out there that you could
That's
download
true. That's
that
true.
are already trained, and then you can tune them up, right, for your specific
Exactly.
use cases.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
Rob, we are at time.
Okay.
Thank you so much again for your words of wisdom, and let me bring Danilo back on here, but thanks again. And
All right.
we will see you shortly.
Sounds good. Always a pleasure, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Rob. All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.